Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. Now in a second hour we'll be focusing on the state of education. My panelists are already here in studio. But before we get right into our conversation, I want to take you live to a conference that is currently happening here in the capital. It's all about the 5th Inclusive African Conference that is currently taking place and of course breaking barriers, advancing digital accessibility for disability inclusive future in Africa. Let's get to listen into the proceedings that are currently ongoing. We do understand a host of members who are currently speaking, including the Honorable Senator Isaac More, the government spokesperson of the Republic of Kenya, and other dignitaries who have attended that particular proceedings. Let's listen in.
You can send a satellite to find, I don't know, life somewhere else outside the galaxy, but then we still have a widening gap of inequality. And it's about decisions that we make around choices, around investments. And I think finance has come up every single, I think in the morning that was what I was hearing. Finance, investment. We have to be deliberate. And we have to be conscious that we cannot have this inequality amidst prosperity, and not a few of us should be prospering when a majority is still suffering from exclusion. I think that's something that we have to do by design, and we have to think about it. And we've seen it. There are systemic issues, and I don't have to talk about this. Glad that Enable at least is talking about standards. Only Kenya has it. I think we really must think how to scale that. We have seen biases around algorithms, and this is important. And hopefully some folks in the room here who are in technology will get into the business of coding, into the business of AI, into the business of machine learning. Because remember, any AI tool that is being developed now comes with an intrinsic bias of the developer. So the more we have you in those spaces, the more AI stops being biased, because I cannot give what I don't have. It's just a human condition. And so let's get a lot of you guys here. I heard in the morning about procurement, and you've seen that it's failed to do that. Hopefully AGPO and the rest will start to figure that one out in terms of thinking about systemic issues. We're seeing issues around practicability, right? So again, the expensive thing was mentioned. Insurance doesn't cover it. Industries need to think very quickly how to do that. Technical support and maintenance, and we know those are the skills that are growing, so can we get a lot of people in those skills? And then compatibility issues. The other piece, of course, is the issues of data, prioritization, and context, and I don't have to belabor that. I think research. You cannot move without data. And the sense that I have, and my take home from this is with NACOSI, with the National Agency for Science, Technology, and Innovation, with a couple of folks that I'm already talking to right now, is you need to think about how do we also ensure that research looks into the area of persons with disability with the wealth of knowledge that was here before. And I like the phrase, you cannot do for us without us. I think somebody said it in the morning. So it needs to be an inclusive sort of design as we do that. Quickly, and I always end up with the hope, is that, as I said, there's an opportunity to shape the future. The future is not yet cast, is not yet shaped, and I can speak from authority on this piece. This is the time to get in. It's not late. And so if we can galvanize around Enable, as I hear, let's figure out how to ensure that a lot of these advancements also build for everybody and not just to build for a few. And I say it's not cast. Of course, the big thing is, as we know, silos. I see this as a silo. I need to see you in other places. I don't see you. Apart from Bernard is my stalker. Where's Bernard? He's there. That's my only stalker there. Let's get out of the silos. Was very glad to come here so that we have some integration. And so that we begin to understand, it has to be deliberate. Unless you do it, nobody will do it. The other piece, of course, is investments. And I always put that thing, that I also need you to help us. Because as I said, as much as you look at persons with disability in Africa as a marginalized group, Africa in itself is marginalized globally around technology. So there's a bigger piece of advocacy around building the industry of the future, but also the infrastructure that will power the future. So whether it's data, whether it's energy, whether we buy enough computers or not, we still need to power it. Electricity is still expensive. Only a third of the continent is connected. We have issues around innovative financing. Everybody's struggling with finance. And so how do we ensure that we can innovatively finance this new revolution? And they're all interdependent. How do we ensure that our partnerships are a little bit different, not predatory, but are more respecting and are more collaborative?
What you're just watching is the 5th Inclusive African Conference that is currently taking place here in the capital. And the theme of this year is Breaking Barriers, Advancing Digital Accessibility for a Disability Inclusive Future in Africa. We do understand that 20 innovators from across the continent will currently showcase their cutting-edge digital accessibility and assistive technology innovations at that particular briefing. And of course, we do understand Sarafina Robi is attending that particular session and will file a story in our subsequent bulletins. We're also keeping an eye on many other events that are currently happening here in the capital and many parts of the country. But for the second hour, we are currently conversing on matters to do. You do know that schools were reopened on Monday, and the government has clearly stated that over 70 institutions are yet to in the country for the last few weeks has affected mostly of those institutions, not just here in the capital, but many parts of the country, and bridges as well, cutting off links to any institutions, not just to institutions as well, but social amenities within the society. Now, for my guest and panelists for this particular session is none other than Dr. Lucy Wakiaga, an education expert. Daktari, welcome to the studio.
Thank you so much.
And of course, somebody who has been an education expert as well. Well, karibu tena.
Thank you very much, Abde.
And then finally, on the farthest end is Dr. Dennis Chacha, the Chair, Disability Mainstreaming Foundation of Kenya. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much indeed.
Let me start with you. Owing to the facts that we have witnessed the floods, now schools have been reopened, 71 of them have not been reopened. Before we get into that, how was, in terms of accessibility to institutions, especially to kids with special needs, how was it before even these floods? Was it accessible to these students, and has it improved over the years?
Well, clearly, accessibility and mobility barriers have been a major conundrum in our institutions, right from the basic education level to the institutions of higher learning, where apparently I've taught in many institutions in this country, so I'm speaking from a point of information. Now, we are looking at wheelchair users, we have walkers. Clearly, the government has done a lot in terms of the legal infrastructure, but there still exists insurmountable challenges. And now in point, we are having the floods that we just experienced. And I wish to bring to your attention that we in the disability sector, we take cognizance of the challenges that are there, and we give recommendations. So rather than having a complaining attitude, we need to adopt the rights perspective. And in that regard, we have the Constitution 2010, particularly Article 53, which clearly enunciates the issue of compulsory basic education. And this one is still buttressed by Article 54, which is an elaborate article on issues of fundamental rights of persons with disabilities. So there is some progress in terms of accessibility. And in accessibility, I'm looking at not only the built environment and the facilities and infrastructure, I'm also looking at information access. And I'm glad the 5th conference that is just happening is mentioning on digital accessibility. These are assistive technologies. And from a point of view of the learners with, you know, we have learners with disabilities, and there's a difference between learners with disability and with special needs. Disability is a legal term that looks at entirely, be it the physical, visual, mental challenges. But when we talk about special needs, then it is a general term. Yeah. And that's why we always advocate for all teachers. They need to be trained, at least they need to have some units on disability mainstreaming. Because you'll have a learner who is hyperactive. But for the teachers who don't understand this particular learner, they'll say that he or she is stubborn. Yeah? So disability mainstreaming cuts across. And I'm quite confident, looking at the 5th conference that is just taking place, all public institutions, including private sector, they are going to look at issues of accessibility guidelines, like KBC, for example. How accessible are your websites when you post material there? In the teaching, or when you are teaching, and for the members of staff who are teaching and the learners. Previously, we had the COVID pandemic. Yes. Yeah, we migrated to, that one ushered into the online or the virtual learning. How do we ensure that, because these learners with disabilities, they have unique challenges, and that is the essence of disability mainstreaming. How do you eliminate the barriers, the communication or physical barriers, so that these learners can access these materials? Just putting a webinar is not sufficient. Yeah, so, and later on I'll be sharing something on the statistics, because statistics are very important. Okay. Like currently we have over 11.4% prevalence levels of learners with disabilities. And I'm looking at the age bracket of 3 to 21 years. And the current census statistics that we are working with is 2019. They postulate that persons with disabilities are at a paltry 2.2% of the general population, which translates to about 918 million. But previously, the data preceding that placed us, I'm saying us because I'm an interested party. Yes. I have a congenital disability, and proudly so. Yeah, previously, the 2009 census report indicated that the statistics were at 4.3%. So what informed the decline? Yeah, and that's why we are saying all stakeholders, parents, caregivers, members of staff, the students themselves, they need to be involved. There is public participation, and public participation is an inherent value in the national values and principles of governance. Okay. Yeah, so we need to ensure all these stakeholders, we need to map them out, either by carrying out a cross-sectional descriptive survey. Okay. And because there are incidences where learners with disabilities or persons with disabilities are hidden. These are myths. If my parents had hidden me, I could have not been able to get this opportunity to come and disseminate this information that I'm giving out here. Yes. Yeah, so we need to accept disability is not a crime. It is with us. You can acquire it. Yeah. All we need is elimination of the barriers, like what they are doing at the 5th summit. Those softwares, like the talking softwares, the audio, they are able to ensure a learner with visual impairment can listen. When you have the sign language interpreter, the TV stations are doing very well. Yes. The deaf are able to access that information. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you. Joshua, now to that question now. 71 schools have not been opened. Was it the right time to open schools now?
Abdi, thank you very much for the question. But before I give my views, may I take this opportunity and chance to pass my special condolence to the Kenyans that we have lost for the past, I think, couple of weeks. It's unfortunate that we had to lose lives due to the disaster, but also it's also important to note that this is a natural disaster. Nobody actually planned that it could happen. Although I also want to take this opportunity to invite the government to realize on disaster preparedness, response, and of course, how they can mitigate the future disasters, because I know disasters will be here to stay. Two, I know the schools were supposed to be reopened a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
But due to the catastrophe, it couldn't be possible because of variety of reasons as far as risk is concerned. As far as we're looking at education as a basic human right, there are certain factors which limit how we can be able to provide education in Kenya. We also recognize that this disaster, of course, been caused by several factors. Of course, culmination of most of the human activities, which have globally, led to climate change, which has resulted to what we are facing today. As per the reopening of schools, yes, of course, young people, the teachers, teachers love being in school. The young people also have missed their teachers, they have missed school. Of course, we are reopening schools looking at the fact that infrastructure, especially the physical infrastructure, is been damaged. Many kids or students and families and even teachers have been displaced. And of course, many bridges, roads have been rendered impassable. And of course, the major issue is that we need to look at how to prioritize. And perhaps we need to put more funds towards repairing of some of these damaged infrastructure in schools. Yes, we have opened schools. I know there is a lot to be done. Most of the schools, like you have said, over 70 schools, kids are not able to be in school. That means that they also have inequality in terms of access to education. Perhaps my view will be that it's high time for us to adopt, technology. My colleague has just said that during the corona period, we actually embraced technology. I want to take this chance maybe to, request the government to the president to consider going forward, not brick and mortar only, but we can do blended learning. Like for the case of the children at home, they could be actually having a mechanism where they can intervene. There is an intervention to ensure that these students and pupils do not actually miss learning. That, of course, if they continuously stay at home, that will affect the curriculum, of course, implementation. We have seen the government, through the means of education, has not basically altered the terms, dates. That means what schools could do is to readjust and recover, maybe do recovery of the lost classes or lessons, so that we can be able to be in tandem with the programs and the circular given by the means of education. The schools have reopened, but there is a lot to be done. I want to urge the government, this is the particular time when we need to come together, all of us. The fact that the schools have reopened does not take away the fact that so many things have been damaged and destroyed, whether it is physical or psychological. I know there are some learners who have gone back to school when they have lost maybe their houses. Then some of their relatives have passed on, even including the teachers. So maybe through the Teacher Service Commission and the means of education, we need to look at how we can be able to provide psychosocial support to these particular cases. The means of health, this is what we call now an all, approach, so that after rains, what we expect again is that we are most likely to have some health problems, waterborne diseases. How can we ensure that we provide learners with clean water? How do we ensure that those houses of health, the washrooms within the school areas, they are actually being cleaned properly? How do we ensure that the food that these kids are going to be given in these schools meets the health standards? This is the time the means officials and together with the TSC should be moving around, not staying in the offices. Go and make sure that there is everything done to mitigate all this risk that can actually arise after these floods. Finally, I would wish to say again that we also have a problem. You have seen like the junior school. The CBC implementation is basically, in question. As we speak, we don't have teachers teaching the junior school because they are on strike. This is the best time for the government to mobilize resources, to maybe particularly even change, reprioritize. The contingency fund should be directed to ensuring that these teachers are brought on board. The Teacher Service Commission is given money to employ these teachers. We don't like seeing teachers, Kenyans, on the streets. We have doctors on the streets. We have teachers on the streets. We have clinical medics on the streets. We cannot allow this to happen because it will affect the social economic sustainability of this country going forward. Okay. And it will affect the future generations. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Lucy, just pick it up from where Joshua has left it. The reason why I asked that question is about, you saw what was happening in Kisumu, for example. Learners had to share classrooms, even school grounds, with the people who are displaced. So what should be prioritized, especially from the government side?
Thank you, Abdian. First of all, I would like to concur with my colleagues in sending my condolences to the families that have lost loved ones. Indeed, it's a very tragic situation and very disheartening all across. Now, when you ask what should be prioritized, and I think Joshua alluded to that when he was making his comments. Kenya does not have a lack of policies and structures. We have very lengthy documents on various aspects. We have a disaster management framework, national disaster management framework. On top of that, and more recently when we had the COVID pandemic, even the schools had a COVID response. The Ministry of Education quickly put up a COVID response, in addition to other policies that are in existence with regards to disaster management. Of course, we know that COVID brought with it special challenges, but that was for me personally, and I think maybe for others, a wake-up call for us in terms of how do we effectively manage our education system. So when you think about saying when can we be ready, we should have been ready. Although of course the magnitude of disasters, sometimes we cannot control. We say they are acts of God or they are acts of nature. But then our strength therefore lies in how quickly we are able to bounce back. So when we look at, and I'll take us back a little bit, when we look at the COVID situation, we had the online learning coming into play. We had the Ministry of Education having the EduTV, which was supposed to have programs that were keeping learners engaged. But soon as the COVID tapered off, we kind of relaxed. We sat back. And now we have another disaster again. So how are we able to move very quickly from that? With the COVID, that should have been a lesson for us, that we keep up with our technology, our online resources, strengthen that aspect. We saw recently the opening up of the virtual university, yes. But at the basic education level, how have we been able to keep up with that? Because had we had those infrastructures in place, then maybe we would have been having a very different conversation. But then in addition to that, we also find that we're in a catch-22, because even if you say, if I tell you now, okay, Abdi, you're going to be at home, your classroom is flooded, but I'm going to be sending you lessons through WhatsApp. Your phone is washed off, the radio at home has been washed off. Like when you talk about the Kisumu incident, there were families whereby you had the mother and the children at the side of the road while the father was busy running into the house to try and salvage what he could be able to salvage. So even when you look at those situations, they are dire situations. So for me, in terms of, well, how do we mitigate these kinds of circumstances? Go back into our communities. I know probably that might be a lot to ask, but Joshua talked about, can we come together? But how do we come together? One of the things is to leverage our community resources. For example, if we look at areas that are flooding, do we have safer grounds that are a bit raised, for example? That's just a suggestion. Could those be centers where people can be moved into and community resources mobilized to be able to support the families? I saw reporting in one of the local channels of whereby a school was acting as a center. So you have tents, and then you have tents within the school. So you find that the families are there, the students are going into the classrooms and coming home maybe for lunch or that kind of arrangement, although we know about the psychological effects of that. Yeah, but if we can use those kinds of arrangements as a temporary measure, maybe if there are other social halls where the students can be in, or even if it's an open space, because now we are dealing with a crisis. So how quickly can we take advantage of those, whether they are open spaces or closed spaces, but they are safe spaces? And then mobilize community resources. The other thing I always put a challenge to is when we look at corporate organizations, when we look at companies, when we look at businesses, and I know, we've had a lot of challenges with businesses trying to stay afloat. But what I always argue is the education system is the one that feeds into these companies, into these businesses, because it's these graduates of the schools who go into these businesses. So how do they give back? How do they give back? Are they able to sacrifice a bit of their resources to be able to provide some of these amenities? Get a couple of books for the learners. Get a couple of writing. Some technology, perhaps. Dr. Dennis talked about the conference that is ongoing. How can those technologies find their way into the very communities that need them most? So for me, there are two ways to look at it. If we say we are opening, I wouldn't say there is a right time or a wrong time to open. It's just how prepared are we? And if you look at even the government and the National Disaster Management Framework, you find there's a very clear channel of the levels, from the state level to the county level, to the sub-county level, to the school level, to the board of management level, of how all these levels are interconnected to be able to manage disasters. Of course, they'll be some may be to a magnitude that is slightly beyond what we can handle, but can we be able to pull our resources together and operate within this structure that already exists and is in place? Thank you.
Doc, let me come back to you. We're talking about an incident that has truly traumatized our younglings who are going to school. So, as the government, given that the schools have opened now, psychosocial support should be key. But do you think coupling it with the syllabus as well as coverage of the syllabus, and probably the government could consider extending the second term dates, but will that solve the problem now?
Well, Abdi, though belatedly, with humility, I wish to send my message of sympathy to the families. I know my colleagues did that. It is rightfully so for me to do that. Well, in the disability mainstreaming sector, we talk about progressiveness. Yeah, so all these interventional be it programs or approaches, they are done progressively. As to your question in coverage of the syllabus,
Yes.
there are still other barriers that precede that. For example, I'm glad His Excellency the President, Dr. William Ruto, has vociferously come out and said there's going to be reconstruction of the infrastructure that was destroyed. But my humble submission would be, while they are doing the reconstruction, they need to ensure they bring on board the issues of universal design. Yeah? Because we are guided by the international commitments. For example, Kenya is a state party to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities.
Yes.
And it clearly touches on virtually all these concepts: universal design, accommodation, yeah, accessibility, assistive technologies, devices. So it is imperative for the budget allocation to clearly factor out retrofitting of, be it existing facilities, because we have facilities that have been there, but they are not accessible. Yeah? So this is the right time to maybe bring on board the assistive devices. For example, the temporal ramps.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be key. Yeah. Then, in line with the syllabus coverage, we have the SNE teachers, the special needs education teachers. So the teachers will go and they are trained, then they'll come maybe for a diploma at KISE. Yeah, there is the motivational approach from Hasberg's theory of motivation. I mean, that's why you'll find most SNE teachers, they want to go and teach in the special schools, because there is a motivation that is tied to it. So we are, even though these are administrative and policy issues, it is important for teachers, SNE teachers who are in regular schools or integrated schools, also to have that motivation. Yeah, and that will go a long way in even ensuring the syllabus coverage.
Mm-hmm.
Then, when we look at the various categories of special needs, there are infrastructures that have been destroyed massively. For example, the informational materials or the manuals.
Yeah.
For example, a learner with visual impairment, the braille materials. Yeah, it is also important for the Ministry of Education. Specifically, there is a Directorate of Special Needs Education.
Okay.
Because braille materials is one of the constitutional and legislative rights for persons with disabilities in Article 54, Section 2, where all PWDs, in this context learners, are entitled to either braille, sign language, or any other appropriate means of communication. So if these materials are destroyed, you cannot walk into a shop and purchase the braille materials. So they need the ministry officials, in conjunction with the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection, they need to liaise with those particular schools that have been affected, and they do an inventory to ensure that these materials are replaced.
Okay.
Yeah, then there is also a very important recommendation still on accessibility. Yeah, we have incidences where my colleague on my right talked about issue of risk.
Yes.
How do we mitigate risk in the context of special needs? Yeah. It is high time that members of staff, the learners, and the society is sensitized through advocacy awareness creation on particularly precautions of, in the event of an emergency, how do you evacuate learners with special needs. Clearly, this information is not very permissible to most people. Then we also have the Marrakesh Treaty. I know scholars are somewhat selfish through the intellectual property rights. Yeah, so you'll find only less than 4% of the informational materials is available to the print disabled. Yeah, so Kenya is acceded to that Marrakesh Treaty. Okay. So currently, we can get your materials and transcribe them into Braille.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Given that we're entering the final leg of our conversation, let me go to Joshua. I'll be coming back to you. You'll have your final remarks. But Joshua, we're talking about, in terms of response, we've just witnessed those images from our institutions. Instead of students coming back to school on the first day, starting their syllabus, they're currently trying to salvage what they can in that particular wreckage. But in the future, should we focus on ensuring that we have a response mechanism, not just from the government, but in institutions as well, so that if damages like this can be witnessed, they know how to go afterwards?
Thank you, Abdi. I believe, to be honest, that yes, we do have policies and the regulations, but I believe we can improve certain gaps. Obviously, there are gaps, particularly as pertains to what you have asked. I would suggest that we come up with something that compels all schools, whether it could be, tinkering with the syllabus, so that we introduce disaster management course to cover, not just wait until somebody does a course in the university on disaster management, but as an empowerment course that will be able to, make people aware, and even the young people aware. When it comes to disaster, it's not the government alone that can act. I believe that's where we need to tinker with the syllabus, the curriculum, so that we kind of introduce disaster management as a compulsory course, either in the schools, in the colleges, and the university training areas. Disaster, there are so many frameworks, whether it's national framework on disaster control and management and the regulation, whether it's global, the way my colleague has been quoting those international conventions, which Kenya is a party, of course, to the UN. Kenya is a member of the United Nations. So any framework discussed pertains to young people, especially children, and special groups like people living with disability is actually domesticated here. We need to have an overhaul. I know the government has done a lot when it comes to mitigation. It has done a lot. When it comes to, preparedness, they have done a lot. When it comes to response and also recovery, they have tried. But obviously, there are gaps. For example, lack of funding, lack of capacity, and that's where I'm suggesting that each and every school at all levels, we must have compulsory training so that we can be able to have capacity building. Disasters will always come. If there is fire in a school setup, for example, it is not the work of the teacher to evacuate the learners. This 21st century will require a certain skill set. We need all of us to participate in evacuation. Or we need all of us to have that information. Because you realize, like these floods, if you go to areas like Murang'a County, you'll always find some landslides. But consistently, people have been building along those areas where there is risk, or there is higher risk. The riparian land, of course, the government is doing a lot as far as, advocacy on these matters concerned. But I think going forward, not only flooding, there is also fire, there is drought. We need to look for a way to empower our people going forward so that we can create capacity in overcoming disasters. Every school, as my parting shot on that area and your question, should prioritize to majority of it is staff, majority of it is students, and even teachers have to be trained on disaster management. Thank you.
Dr. Lucy, not just disaster management, should climate change also be inculcated profusely into our curriculums, not just in basic but in high institutions? So because these are the effects of Mother Nature, given that we have a little bit misbehaved the planet, but not specifically not Africa, because Africa we are currently experiencing these effects from developed worlds who are emitting more gases, more emissions than us. So we are bearing the greatest brunt. Should climate change now be a compulsory into our curriculum?
Abdi, that's a good question, and I would also like to say something. We have also misbehaved.
Yes.
Yeah, even in Africa we have misbehaved. In as much as the misbehavior could have been bigger in other continents, but
yes,
we also have misbehaved. We have cases even here in this country where there has been reckless logging, cutting down of trees. In the past we would have like constructing gabions, campaigns to plant trees, and it's encouraging now that with this current government we are seeing like a renewed effort to plant trees and be more conscious of the environment. But I think these are conversations that we could have had a long time ago. And if we are honest enough, even when we look at issues of flooding, there have been mainly cases of, as Joshua shared just now, of building on riparian lands, too close to water bodies or in areas that exhibit a lot of risk. So what is our responsibility also in terms of having caused some of these challenges? Of course, in addition to, we can't ignore the fact that globally there's been impact on climate has had an impact on us. But indeed it is, these are some of the things that we need our syllabuses to exhibit. We need our curriculum to have these kinds of things, because these are the realities on the ground. And how do we say that our curriculum is a living document, so to speak, that can be able to adopt to the changes with time? Or is it just about rote learning because we want our students to pass exams? So I agree with you. Yes, that is something that would really benefit the curriculum. In addition to what Joshua said about disaster management, in fact, maybe there would be just very short courses on disaster management, and you go and you have a choice whether you want to take it or not. Yes. But if this is something that can be inculcated, I remember when when I was very young, when I was in primary school, we even used to be taught how to cross the road. There were songs we used to sing. So how can we bring those kinds of domesticated approaches in terms of teaching climate change, having it as part of the curriculum? In as much as I saw the students cleaning up their schools, we agree that it is disheartening. But it is also encouraging that they are actually taking responsibility of their school environment. They were not sitting and waiting for someone else to come and clean. So for me, I'm seeing like there's a lesson on both sides of the divide. They are trying to rebuild for themselves, have ownership of the process. And I'm sure they'll be very proud that they were able to bring their school back to life. Something else, yes, that is very critical is we can't have all these conversations without budget, without money. Okay? Any structure, any design, any policy has to be implemented with a budget. So we have to look at, of course we know government budget is never enough. So that's why earlier on I had said, what about these other agencies, these other entities that benefit from the human resource, from the citizenry that graduate from these schools? What role do they also play in terms of giving back to the communities?
Quickly, Dr. Let me start with you, Dr. Dennis. 30 seconds, what would your final remarks be?
Well, my parting shot, in line with the international mantra of leaving no one behind, we ask for the goodwill of the government of the day in terms of enforcement of all these good regulations. And disability mainstreaming is a target item in performance contracting.
Okay.
So all public institutions and private sector, it is your inherent duty and obligation to ensure that disability mainstreaming is done at your place of work, including institutions of learning, right from the basic education level, the TVETs, up to the institutions of higher learning. And the primary law here is the disability law. Okay. And I would like to mention this as I complete. I'm glad the State Department of Social Development has brought the draft policy on disability mainstreaming that will be undergoing public participation. This has been lacking for a long period of time, and maybe that's why there's been all this inconsistency of realigning the existing legislation to the Constitution and the international commitments. Okay. Thank you very much indeed for having me.
Thank you. Joshua, 30 seconds, tafadhali.
Thank you, Abdi. Perhaps I could say that this is the opportunity time for us to call for complementarity. I know the government alone may not be able to, you know, recover everything that we have lost in this phenomena, but we request both state actors within the region, within the global society, and locally, non-state actors and other agencies to come on board. The NGCDF, I heard there is a lot that is going to be added in terms of finance. Okay. Let us redirect our energies. Let us also solve our own issues. Let the doctors go back so that we can mitigate another risk on that aspect. Grateful for that. Yes. And then, of course, let's ensure that we can be able to mitigate and empower our people as far as disaster management is concerned.
Okay. Finally, Dr. Lucy, tafadhali.
Thank you, Abdi. For me, there's a question you asked, and I don't know whether it was adequately responded to in terms of the curriculum and extending the term dates. Yes. For me, I tend to be controversial about that because I'm always asking myself, where are we hurrying to? Where are we hurrying to? You can run through a syllabus and finish it within 3 months, but have the students learned anything? So for me, with this whole situation we are in, let us take a pause. Let us reflect and see what do the students really need, so that we are not rushing to pump all this information that we want to pump so that the students, quote unquote, cover the syllabus. So for me, it's to take a pause, let's reflect, and let's really give our students the knowledge that they really need, not just rushing to finish the syllabus. That would be my parting shot.
Thank you so much. That is Dr. Lucy Wakiaga, an education expert, Joshua Nyampari, also an education expert, and then finally Dr. Dennis Chacha, the chair of Disability Mainstreaming Foundation of Kenya. Thank you so much for making time for us. That has been our conversation focusing on the state of education, especially focusing on the reopening of schools. That continues, of course. Over 71 schools have not been opened. We're still keenly following upon that, given that the government spokesperson, we anticipate him, given that he gives weekly briefings to tell us how many schools have not been open so far. Has the number declined in the coming days? That has been our conversation. My name is Abdi Aziz Hashim. My co-anchor is Lucy Mora, but don't go too far. My colleague Khalid Abdullahi is up next with Kurunzi Mashinani. Good afternoon for now.